Boker Tov, good morning. Welcome. Good to see everybody filing in virtually, as one might say. Looking forward to another morning together here on Zoom. Facebook and I are not on speaking terms this morning, so I put a little note there so that those who usually join us on Facebook might find us here. Otherwise, of course, thanks to the wonderful work of Ruthie Swern, who's been helping us in an amazing way, our Director of Communication, to be in connection with everybody during this time. We'll get this up on Facebook afterward rather than during, as much as we would prefer to do it that way. So I hope everybody's feeling good this morning and that the day is off to a good start. And just a moment, when it's the proper time, we will begin our Boker Tov time together for the morning. Not so much sunshine today, but clear, and we'll see. How's your internal weather? We're internal all the time. I don't just mean whether it's hot or cold, but I guess we sort of have to take our temperature in the morning to see how we feel. And hope everybody's feeling good and settled during what easily can be unsettled times in so many different ways for us. Boker Tov, good morning, everyone, and Boker Tov from Temple Sinai. Welcome to this daily opportunity from Temple Sinai in Toronto to connect, reflect, and remember. This morning, as we gather together on the 29th of Nisan, on the 23rd day of the month of April, for it being one of our Thursday streams, we have the challenge, the opportunity, the privilege to go back and again look at our parashah for this week, especially because it is a double parashah, Tazria Metzora, an extremely famous parashah because it contains such unusual material, even in the context of Torah. I talked a little bit about some of the really meaningful messages that I find hidden in this particular parasha. And having looked a little bit at one section from Tazria, I could spend lots of time on this portion. We take a moment now and we're gonna share some thoughts about a portion rather from Metzora. If we thought that discussing all of the different skin diseases and affections, connections, challenges, illnesses that people might have on themselves physically was challenging enough, what do we find in chapter 14 of the book of Leviticus, in starting with verse 34? When you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, and I inflict an eruptive plague upon a house in the land of Israel, upon a house in the land you possess. It's a fascinating passage, even just the beginning here, although there's so much to it. The owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, the Kohen, saying, Kanega nira li v'bayit, something like a plague has appeared on my house. The priest shall order the house cleared before the priest enters to examine the plague, so that nothing in the house may become unclean. After that, the priest shall enter to examine the house. And if we look just a little further, we see that if it doesn't sound complicated enough that there would be a plague on a house, listen to the description in verse 37. If when he, the Kohen, the priest, examines the plague in the walls of the house is found to consist of greenish or reddish streaks that appear deep into the walls, then further investigation is necessary. Green and red streaks. While this sounds anything from, some people say this sounds impossible and unusual and imaginary, and other people say this sounds like the kind of mold or things that grow on the walls of a home, especially in different parts of the world. I don't think either of those is the right way to approach this portion. I think this portion, more than others in such an obvious way, whatever literal meaning it has a powerful symbolic meaning. I mean, after all, When we talk about a house, what are we talking about? A house is more than a place. A house is what it represents. Wow, a house is a home. It's a family. It's our sense of being in place or at home in the world. A home is all of those things. And so if we look, we can find many different messages in this entire lengthy section that talks about this case of a nega, of some kind of a plague upon our house. Now, of course, a plague in today's world, as we saw during Pesach, as we went through the COVID-19 affected Passover, plague is a very laden word in our lives at this time. And so looking additionally at what these words offer, I think is especially warranted and important at this time. I'm actually going to go in reverse order from these verses of things we can find, because it's just, I find it fascinating to see all the little nooks and crannies of these few verses, some that just point themselves out to me, but especially one of them that becomes a surprising nexus for discussion in our tradition as a whole. Now, if we look at verse 36 that you have on your screens, so many people look at these two parashiot, just like they look at the rules in the Torah about what we should eat and not eat, as being health and hygiene related. And they certainly might have health and hygiene aspects, but think a moment about what we find in verse 36, right? It's the job of the priest to come and to look at the house to see whether in fact it is a plague affected home. And what does the priest do? 36, the priest orders the house cleared. Take the furniture, put it outside. Before the priest enters to examine the house. Why? So that nothing in the house becomes unclean. That's right. What is it that changes when the priest examines the house? It is a declaration. It is him saying, sara'at, this is that plague. This is what's here. And his naming of it, an authority figure naming something, is what changes that spiritual reality. What does that mean? It reminds us of the power of naming. Does that mean that they didn't know that it was the same a moment before? No, they're not talking about physical things. But rather, there's an awareness in Torah throughout, and in this parasha particularly, that each of us, when we are functioning in different elements of our life and different moments of our life as an authority figure, we can't only pay attention to our actions, although our actions have the greatest significance, but how we name what we do, how we name what we see, how we name others is an extremely powerful thing. It matters much more than we might realize. And hidden within this text that seems to be about this fanciful event of a house infected by a plague, we find a reminder of the power of naming. Now, in verse 35, it says, the owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, something like a plague has appeared on my house. Now, we said here the priest is the authority figure, and the homeowner says something like a plague. They wonder in our tradition, because they didn't waste their time on so many different things that we do, and we're focused on the tradition. We don't always, it's not a waste of time to be outside the tradition, but sometimes I wonder if we give the tradition all the time it deserves. They wondered, well, what if the homeowner actually knows more about plagues than the priest? Someone has to have knowledge of these things. And the answer is the importance of us, even when we know things, of relying on authorities and outside information, that we have to have a sense of humility, even about our own perceptions, and not just say, oh, this is what I see. But to say, whether it's with an authority or someone with whom we're sharing our lives, or someone else with whom we're engaged in some kind of human or business enterprise, we have to say, you know, this is what I think I see. Bringing that humility to our perceptions, to our understandings, is so important. And if there are two sort of human reminders, behavioral reminders in these two verses, the first verse actually becomes a place for a conversation about how we understand difficult things that happen in our world and God's connection to them. Because in verse 34, it says, when you enter the land of Canaan that I give you as a possession, I inflict. It seems to really say that if I were translating the Hebrew myself, I will inflict, spoken in the divine voice, an eruptive plague, nega, on the house in the land of Israel. And so God seems to be saying that it is, in fact, the Holy One who brings the plague. It doesn't say here, although there is assumptions of that kind, that when you do something wrong, here's the consequence. It says you come into the land and I will bring a plague. Rashi, if this is a complicated verse, to think that maybe the Torah is saying that everything comes from God, good and bad, which is one perspective that many people find that many people find meaningful. At the same time, it's a perception that many people don't. Rashi makes it even a little more exciting. He says that this is actually a good news for them, that there will be a plague. Why? Because before our answers came into the land of then Canaan, the land that is Israel, that the Amorites who had lived in that area put hidden treasure in their walls. They took what they had and they hid it inside the walls of their home. And so only by God giving this plague could the people then, as says later in the verses, have to take apart the walls in order to inspect the home, and they would find treasures inside. So if anything, that makes this passage, I think, a little more difficult, implying, which again, some people are comfortable with and some people are quite uncomfortable with, that there is in this moment a representation of the difference between the divine plan and view of the universe and that our own view, that sometimes things seem like a plague when in fact in a different way they're a gift. Now, I have trouble even saying those words right now, I have to be honest, having talked to so many families who are directly affected, not only by this new virus, but by any illness at a time like this and by the isolation that people are experiencing. And so I find it literally physically difficult to say the words out loud. Oh, well, in this difficulty is a hidden positive. Interestingly enough, in Be'er B'Sadeh, a commentary on Rashi, that's right, that's what we're lucky to have as Jewish people. We don't just have the Torah and commentaries, we have commentaries on commentaries, because it's not picayune, minuscule issues. It's like a chorus of family and friends who've wrestled with issues that we wrestle with in every generation. And Be'er B'Sadeh on Rashi says that some people are quite troubled by this because they find that it says that God is bringing this evil upon people. And yet then in the commentary, he goes on to present not that it's good news, as Rashi says, which Rashi is taking from an early midrash, an early piece of Jewish folklore, but rather he says, no, what it is God announcing, not that it's a punishment, but that these plagues will happen. And that when these plagues happen, whether we deserve them or we don't deserve them, then at that time, we can do a number of different things. We can look at it as a punishment, or we can look at it and say, as difficult as it is, where's the opportunity here? Where in the challenging situation that I'm living in, even with all its difficulties and negativities, can I find some hidden treasures? And that perspective, all of these perspectives are sort of the wrestling that all of us would naturally be doing at a time like this in our world where, wow, we're just living in a different moment than we were a month ago. So this morning, when we hear these words, I hope there's a challenge in it that says, whatever each of us is experiencing, whatever you're feeling, I hope in addition to getting the medical, the physical, the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual, the personal support that you need, that each one of us can also take a time that looks so different and say, can I find a hidden golden nugget or two? can I find something that I'm going to carry with me and that's going to help me have a perspective on my life going forward that is more meaningful, more rewarding, something that maybe offers me an opportunity to make a turn in the direction that I was going, and those things that are in control, in my control. And can I find a life that out of even a time that is difficulty and that has so much real suffering for so many, that also has something very specific that each of us might find for ourselves. I hope that we can. And part of doing it, I know a number of people have told me how much meaning they've found in caring for others during this time, in doing little acts that are not little, that involve reaching out to others and being with them in their illness and isolation, not physically, but emotionally at a time like this. And so in that spirit, I want to offer our prayer for those in need of healing, keeping in mind certainly those very specifically in our community of whom I know, in families and in circles of friends who are in need of strength and healing. We turn for all of them and all that you're holding in your heart now to these words of refuah. Mishiberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak V'Yaakov V'Imotenu Sarah Rivka Leah V'Rachel V'Yirapeh et Kol Makotenu Yiratzon Milfanech Adonai Eloheinu Lachal Imam V'Larapotam V'Yishlach Lanu Mehera Refuah Shlema V'Teret Shalom V'Noar. Amen. May the one who blessed our ancestors bless and heal all who suffer. May it be the divine will to provide healing and strength. Reveal to us the holiness of life, the wholeness of shalom, and together we say, Amen. And so now we take our moment of memory for the morning, remembering those who died in recent days and weeks, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. During the period of Shloshim, during the last 30 days, we send our condolences to the families of Susan Friedman, Mark Gordon, Sidney Burns, Ann Williamson, Henry Schneider, Gloria Victor, Dorothy Besser, Harvey Leopold, Lauren Barsky, Hannah Glatter, Ruth Kelman, and we remember all the victims of the mass shooting in Nova Scotia of this past weekend. And on your site, on the 29th of Nisan, on the anniversaries of their deaths, we remember Mark Belchez, Lillian Beal, Rhoda Buckspan, Fran Charkow-Kroll, Mindy Fenton, Bernard Fraley, Mina Gellertner, Sam Glassman, Ben Kamen, Bella Keller, Francis Lemberg, Donald Lippman, Mati Milgram, Sam Moldovsky, Molly Prenick, Janet Rosen, Benjamin Rosen, Lawrence Schweitzer, Eva Sheffman, Jules M. Slater, Bessie Weintraub, William Weisdorf, Jack Winberg. Zichronam Livracha. May their memories be a blessing to us. Our griefs and sympathies are mingled as we turn together towards sanctified by memory, words glorified by hope in the Kaddish Yatom. Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah, Be'alma Divarach Hirutei v'Yamlich Malchutei, V'Chayechon v'Yomechon, V'Chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, V'Agala u'Bizman Karev v'Imru. Amen. Yehe Shmei Rabbah Mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, Yitbarach v'Yishtabach v'Yitpa'ar v'Yitromam v'Yitnaseh, V'yit hadar, v'yit ale, v'yit halal, shemei de kudesha brechu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and bring comfort and strength to all who remember. And together we say, Amen. Been wonderful starting the day with you again today. Make it a wonderful day.